Welcome to Take5, a podcast produced by Go Short, in which we take a break from the festival to talk about the art of making short films, film festivals, and more. Making sure we step back and reflect by sharing industry insights, experiences, helping today's and tomorrow future makers in the filmmaking. So on today's episode is Pilvi Takala joining us on this little intermission. So grab a seat, take a break, and let us explore the art of filmmaking together.
They don't want to reject me openly, but they're like, oh, wait, let me get out my phone. Like, let's find a way. And then I'm like, are you prepared to do this every day? I believe there's something about like being included and excluded from communities that is kind of universal. So that was something I was drawn to, like how to interact in a way that brings out some new knowledge or is somehow exciting or intriguing. We get to look at normality in a more precise way and be like, okay, this is how we're being normal. Okay.
Pilvi Takala is originally from Helsinki, Finland, and lately she has been living in Berlin. In her work, she combines real documented actions with state portraits. Through her video works, she examines specific communities in order to unravel social structures and question regular rules of behavior in different contexts. So Pilvi is this year's Maker in Focus for the Go Short Festival. So during the festival, her work will be screened and she will be specially highlighted. So Pilvi, how does it feel to be this year's Maker in Focus?
It feels great, very flattering.
Yeah.
If people think like it makes sense to make a whole screening of my work, I mean, of course, I'm delighted.
So why did you agree to this?
I mean, why not? Like, for this same reason. You make a lot of work, and if people appreciate it, then it's good to show up for that occasion.
So you are known, like I said, for exploring social conventions and everyday situations in your artwork. Can you tell us how you came to this approach?
I guess it's like just an interest of mine, like a natural interest since I was a kid, to kind of observe how people function together, what are kind of social norms, how people interact. And then I guess the realization that there's not, like when you observe something like that, you're always also part of it. So that was something I was drawn to, like how to interact in a way that brings out some new knowledge or is somehow exciting or intriguing. So it's just been in there for me always.
Yeah, so one of your short movies you made is The Stroker, and that was actually based on some true events. You went into a second home, I think, to observe and actually, just to simply say it, to touch people and see how they would react and react on how you were doing. So how do you select these kind of situations or subjects you want to explore?
So I guess there's always like a certain kind of discomfort that drives the like interest or the practice in general, but also like the Space Second Home, they actually had interest in like having performance art in there. So I was invited as an artist to consider to do something, but I usually don't do, or I almost never do performance for audience, but I do performative activities, interventions, I like to call them, and then somehow research that situation. So Second Home was a place where I was invited to, and then I felt like immediate discomfort in there. And I tried to like explore that, like, what is it here that makes me feel like, oh, like I want to feel separate from this space, although like they had creative individuals in. And I guess the sense of like curated community and this like forced kind of well-being was something that well-being in the name of productivity. So underlying stress of succeeding in a way where, I have startups and most of them actually fail. Like that's the nature of this, that kind of work. So there was something there in this like construction of that community that I felt drawn to. And then after sitting with it and thinking about it, I came up with this like addition to their own well-being program that already involved like meditation and other activities. So I proposed like, instead of like performance, can I just be part of your well-being program and offer this like touching service, and we see what happens.
Did you think you succeeded? Or
I
did it
succeeded.
have impact?
I succeeded in what I wanted to do, which wasn't to implement touching service and make people more productive through this touching service. Mm-hmm. So that was like the cover-up story. But what I actually wanted to do is to initiate negotiation, like around like how do we share this space, like around consent, like this kind of things. Like you're in the space working. There's not a hierarchy that is very obvious, but there is certain things that are expected, and they're not on paper or you didn't agree to them. But this kind
More
of like
moral.
yeah, and more like you feel like you should be open-minded. So you should be open-minded to this touching thing also, because it's good for you and it will make you more productive, while you feel inside like this is weird, which it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it is weird that you have somebody hired. So I basically implemented something that would be normal if we know each other already, and then we're working in the same place and we pass each other. We're both busy, but I like acknowledge like, hey, I see you. And I think that does bring well-being. But then when you have somebody like specifically hired to do that, it's a bit like, I mean, people could get used to it, I think, but my purpose wasn't to make them used to it. My purpose was to initiate, like heighten the discomfort, though, so there would be like an actual verbal and, I mean, physical kind of negotiation around this activity.
How did the people react after did they found out that you were hired for this job?
I mean, I started doing it, and in a few days in, we emailed everybody like, hey, this is this personal touch, like a touching service. This email is also in the film. Just also to tell people like, hey, like you can give feedback. Like this is not just some weirdo in the space. Like there's a role and
she has a purpose.
Yeah. And I mean, in a way, it makes me more legitimate. On another hand, it's easier to talk about it. So then, I mean, some people, there was just a few people who like directly kind of said like, hey, I don't think this is appropriate. But most people expressed, which I thought was quite beautiful, like things like, you know, we have been touched and we think it's weird, but we shouldn't think it's weird. But we actually do, like this kind of, that you're expressing like, hey, we know that we should be open to this, but we feel differently. So I think that's
really confused.
Yeah,
actually.
Confused and kind of, but still on the side of expressing discomfort rather than putting up with it and getting used to it and kind of. And then, of course, big part of my interest was like the nonverbal, like how people with their bodies, like either really trying to show me like, hey, don't do this again, which then I totally respected. Yeah. But most people found like some way that is, they don't want to reject me openly, but they're like, oh, wait, let me get out my phone. Like, let's find a way. And then I'm like, are you prepared to do this every day? Like, just always escape by like getting out your phone. I mean, this is what we do. People do this every day in situations like you're like, oh shit, I have to avoid this person. Oh.
Yeah, maybe like they should confront them or just not even confront them in a negative way, but you can also confront people in a positive way by telling them like it's not really nice that you're touching me.
Like, thanks, but
thanks, but no thanks. More like that.
Yeah.
So everyone is really different. Everyone has a different culture. Everyone has different morals. So how do you hope people from different cultures and backgrounds will look and get something meaningful out of your work?
I mean, obviously, I have my own cultural background. And then also in terms of the spaces where I've made my work, it's usually within a culture that I, like this stroker, for example, is located in London. It's like very kind of metropolitan context, but also predominantly British, which is like non-touchy by default. Being London, there's obviously people from different backgrounds also in that space. And that's not so much highlighted in my film, but there were people who found it completely normal and they didn't notice like, oh, this person is touching people. They were just like, oh, this person is nice. So there were also like other interpretations within that context. But then, of course, for the viewers of the work, like, I believe there's something about like being included and excluded from communities that is kind of universal to everywhere. But of course, I can't tell like how people from completely different cultural background like read my work. So it's just like, it's there. And
you can also make everyone happy. It's not possible.
Yeah. And we don't all, speak the same language in terms of like more complex things. Yes. So, I mean, that's richness and it's great to hear what people think of it. Of course, also I show my work mostly in Europe, Northern America. Like there has been a few shows like Asia, outside of, but also being from here, like, of course, it would be great to show my work everywhere and see what people say about it. But yeah, that's kind of, it's out there, and it's not something I like. Every work is made in a specific context, and I try to make it as like readable as possible. But yeah, I'm just me with this experience. So yeah.
Yeah. So you also made a movie called The Real Snow White.
Yeah.
It's already been up for a few years, but it's still, I find it personally really interesting because it's really easy to look at. Like it's just a conversation you're following actually, but the man from Disneyland that confronts you that you can't dress up as Snow White inside the Disney park doesn't actually know what the reason is you can't dress up as Snow White. So how do you deal with like any ethical considerations while creating your artworks that challenges interactions or systems? Because like, how do you make the decision to put that man in your video?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everywhere in my like practice, first in terms of like what is the activity, like, do I stand behind like dressing up as Snow White and showing up at the gates of Disneyland? Yes. I mean, I'm not hurting anyone. But then I'm filming. There are a lot of people filming in that situation. Their purpose of filming might be very different from mine. I don't know how many other like filmmakers happen to be out there, but
great movie. We should stop this.
Like everybody's like, hey, let's. But basically, in that situation, people are out with their cameras. That was also 2009. There was still like actual cameras rather than phones.
Yeah.
I mean both, but
different quality.
Different quality. Yeah. But like I had a friend just with the video camera, not the massive one, but like a consumer size one.
Yeah.
So then, of course, afterwards I have this footage. I don't want to contact Disneyland and be like, hey, I filmed this thing and your employee is in it. Like, can I use it? Because they will say no. And I'm like up against like a massive corporation. Like, I don't know if they would, they would answer me. It's basically public space, I'm openly filming. And then really, I think the ethical question is like, how does this person look in my film? Like, are they being made fun of? Like, what is my position? What is their position? Of course, I will decide like whether I think they are not being made fun of. Therefore, I think it's fine to show this. I mean, he might think differently.
Yeah, that's always a problem you have.
Yeah. But I'm like ready to take that risk. And then, like I to this day haven't been ever contacted by anybody who appears in that film or so on.
It's been a few years.
So it's been a few years. It must be fine or whatever. They haven't seen it. But there's also works that are in the screening where I filmed actually with like hidden cameras. So people they're not even like, because here people are out in public space and they see cameras everywhere. So, and also when you're working, you're like representing Disneyland. I know this is like a low paid labor position. You're just some guard in the door. You're like, oh, again, some like person who didn't get it. Like, but you're not so much yourself. You're in this role of that job. And that's also part of my interest. So that's one thing. But then the hidden camera, that's even one step like more complicated because, I mean, depends on the situation. You might be able to ask afterwards, but that also carries the weight of having filmed without first asking.
Yeah. Were there any times you struggled with the moral aspects?
I mean, there's always the thought process first with the activity and then with way of documenting or not documenting. I mean, I often document also by notes by having somebody witness it, like a person watching it happen rather than filming it.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been anything where I'm like, oh, like this went too far. Or, I mean, sometimes choice of like what to use, what not to use. But even with that, I haven't had. I think it has to do with because I usually am like center of attention and the most weird person. And there isn't this dynamic from like candid camera where the whole point is that the person doesn't know. that like we're making fun of the person because they don't know it's being filmed or it's a trick or something.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping the attention is elsewhere and people kind of look normal actually, or we get to look at normality in a more precise way and be like, okay, this is how we're being normal. Okay. But yeah, it's always ethical considerations, but I think it's not possible to be like, at least with the type of work I make and I'm interested in, it's always a bit messy.
Yeah.
But then it's just like I will take responsibility and I will make the decisions according to what I feel like, okay, this is fair or fine. And so far I haven't had like a big backlash. From
not any claims or privacy claims.
Whenever I could ask people afterwards for consent, I always got it. But, it's just could be good luck.
Yeah, but keep it up, I guess. So your work is very unique. You really have your own style and everyone actually goes along with it. So how have you managed to find your own voice and style in this kind of art of making?
I guess that is like not something you construct like, oh, let me be very unique here. It's just, for me, the performative or the intervention is really in the center of the practice. And then I have like tried to figure out different ways of like storytelling and mostly filmmaking around it. And then early, like the kind of hidden camera was the most obvious way to document. And then also the cheapest and most simple way to make the film. And I have actually like consciously worked away from that, which then you have to find other ways. But I don't really think about like how to make it unique rather than like how to communicate the stuff that I think is the most interesting.
So you do take some risks for making your movie. At least that's what I think. It depends on what kind of risk. But like for the Snow White movie, you just walk into the Disneyland without knowing what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And also with the stroker, you just touch people. You still don't know what would happen. So how important is it for filmmakers to take risks and step out their comfort zone?
I think it's important that you're like learning something. I mean, that at least for me, like learning something with your practice. Learning in general happens somehow like in the edge of your comfort zone. Like, I don't think it's taking risks as such is like the important thing. Like the crazier things you do, the bigger risks you take, the better. Like, no, like, I mean, it's different for everyone, but it's also boring if you're staying just in the area where you exactly know what you're doing and everything is completely under control.
Maybe that's more your comfort zone, and your comfort zone can be bigger. Depends like, on the person. Maybe.
But for me, I like to feel that there is, I don't know, risk, or it has to feel somehow to me like I have no idea how this is going to play out. Like I have some idea, but I really want to see how this is going to play out.
What kind of impact do you hope to make with your art?
I guess it's like more like asking questions rather than giving like suggestions. But it is definitely, I feel like I want to be part of the conversation about how we live together, like societal issues. But it's like a tool for thinking and discussing. It's not like, hey, everybody should just touch each other at workplace from now on. It's not meant as like try at home or
don't try at home.
Yeah. But more as like, hey, what is going on here? Let's like look at this in very tiny detail. By like disrupting, you can see better like how this thing is constructed. And then I don't claim the authority to say like, hey, I know how we should do this. But in general, it helps to have this like inquiry, and that's maybe where the art making is.
Have there been any important lessons you've learned while making short movies or making art?
I guess like there's a lot of luck involved. Like, I mean, when you're making art, making movies, you of course want to make a good movie, but it just doesn't always work out. Like you might have a subject or an interest or a thing that is super interesting, but you don't find the way that it becomes like a great film and that's just how it is. Like luck has a lot to do. Like, I went in front to the Disneyland in this dress, and I didn't know if it's going to be boring. Like, I thought it's at least interesting for me, but it happened to be that there were these little discussions that were really nice, like in terms of like what I was interested in. But those people happened to be there and say those things, and it could have been very different also.
What is your advice for maybe young filmmakers or just filmmakers who want to experiment with exploring social conventions and like everyday situations like you do?
Oof, what is my advice? I don't know. Just have to try different things.
Go out in the world.
Go out in the world, try things. I mean, the way I was starting off was really to try to keep the production as simple as possible, meaning as cheap as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, try to do things in a way where I don't need to wait for funding. I'm not anymore in that situation, but now I'm like, oh, I can't anymore work without like this and that. Like, yeah, once you get into it, then you're like, oh, it's so nice to work with professional people. But in the beginning, I really thought it's more important to, that I can do my practice, do the experiments, do things. Yeah, you learn more by making than waiting, than writing your applications or pitching around. But yeah, that might not be it for everybody. But I mean, for me,
it worked for you.
Yeah,
so.
It worked out. And yeah, try to make something with the means that you have available. And then later you will maybe have more means, and then you can make a fancier thing. But yeah.
Maybe later in the process.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching and listening to this last episode of Take5. If you like this, please watch the other ones or listen to the other ones. And see you next year at the Festival of Go Short.